What's going on, everyone? CE420 here. I want to do a video where I get into some harvesting tips after 5 years of growing. After 5 years, half a decade of growing this magical plant we all know and love, I want to give you guys my best harvesting tips that I can possibly give, starting with when to harvest, pretty much whenever you want. So dialing in your harvest is one of those things that really takes time to take down your preference, decide what percentage of trichomes you want. A lot of people will tell you different things. Some people will tell you 30% amber, 10% amber, and it basically goes off of how mature those trichomes are, when you want to cut them down, when you want to start drying that plant. And the number I usually go for is when I start seeing amber, I give it a couple days to a week, and then I cut it down. So I'll look all over the plant and make sure that this area is maturing, this area is maturing, the bottom's maturing, the middle is pretty mature, and having a quality lollipop up to this point is going to help you out because it's going to give a more even distribution of the maturity of the buds, of the trichomes, and make sure that there isn't a lot of energy lost. Make sure that the top growth is the main growth and that there is very little on the bottom to none. So you're going to want to make sure you are doing that. Once you decide you want to harvest your plant, it can be 10% amber, 20% amber. I don't really care. I just want to have as many milky trichomes as there's going to be because that is the top potency of the THC. When those trichomes have that very white, milky, just that very white color to them, once they start to turn amber, it's because they're starting to degrade and become other cannabinoids, which can be beneficial. But if you're looking for the peak THC, you're just looking for as many trichomes getting mature as possible. And obviously you can go to breeder recommendations. If they say 45 to 50 days, cut in that window. If it says 65 to 70 days, cut in that window. If it says 45 to 55 days, cut in that window. Always go by the breeder recommendation first. This ensures that you're going to get an ideal effect or ideal potency based on the person who made it. And who better to judge from. So once you decide you're going to chop your plant down, make sure your room is quality. Make sure your drying room is a quality drying room. Make sure it's somewhere in that 60-60 range when it comes to relative humidity, when it comes to temperature. If you go down into the 55 range, 50 to 55 range for either of those, that can also work. You definitely don't want it to go higher than 70 because then you start to run the risk of mold and other things that aren't going to be good. Mostly mold is what we're worrying about in this stage because there's so much moisture packed into those buds that it's going to be very important to keep that environment. And whether you want to use a fan to move the air around, personally, I recommend it. There's mold spores pretty much everywhere in the air, and if you want to keep them away from your plant, keep them moving, no different than a pest, keep a fan in your room as an extra precaution. I know there's growers that don't do it, but personally, moving forward, it is something that I recommend. So those two things, environment, fan, personally recommended. Now let's get into the actual harvesting. You waited until your plant was a little bit crispy on the outside, still a residual moisture on the inside to keep that bud with the moisture so you can do a proper cure. Once you get to the actual trimming stage, there are things you can do, there are tools you can get, and if you cannot buy trimming shears, which I cannot, if you cannot buy a trimming bowl, like I cannot, if you do not have the money for these things that are going to make your harvest 10 times easier, 30 times faster, you are going to go with scissors. And personally, I recommend getting 2 different types of scissors. But what 2 different types are we looking at? There's so many different kinds of scissors. There's different styles, modes, functions, brands, things, features, all of this stuff that you can find for scissors just for trimming your plant. Well, I recommend getting 2 different kinds. And that's going to be a scissor kind of like this, just a bonsai shear that opens up and you have to flex your hand open to open, and these kinds of shears with a little spring in the middle. See if I can get you a better angle on that. It's got a little spring in the middle that pushes it out, and you actually have to close your hand to get this action of trimming. And I even have shears that have tips that are bent to get angled in to those tough to reach places if you're looking to make craft cannabis, which some people recommend. Another tip we're going to get into kind of makes that a defeated purpose. But let's just assume for right this second you want to make super high quality cannabis, the most bag presentable cannabis ever. You would get those angled shears to be able to reach into those tough places. But the reason I have two different types of shears is because there are two different actions for my hands to do. There are two different, very different muscles, well, not muscles, but muscle actions that are being taken here, and that is going to severely lower your fatigue. You know, when you're harvesting your plant, you're doing a bunch of chopping, you're doing one action for a very long time, it can be cumbersome and it can be difficult. Think of it as the difference between a tricep dip, where you're extending and contracting your tricep, versus your bicep curls. They're exercises that both exercise your arm, but one is contracting a different muscle than the other, and you're able to work out more, do more volume. Well, this isn't that much different. It's the same muscles, but it's doing a different action, contracting in a different way, increasing your ability to trim for longer. Now, one thing that someone asked is, how do I make my trimming faster? The best way to do that, if you cannot get a bowl, is to simply lower your standards of what a trimmed bud is. Leaving a lot of those sugar leaves on there will give you an advantage with higher trichome numbers, and also sugar leaves are simply a beneficial thing to have. You have all your cannabinoids in there, and goddammit, terpenes are also stored inside of those trichomes. The only thing is, the density is a lot different, which is why there's not as much flavor, there's not as much THC, there's not as much CBD, is because the trichome density, population density, is lower on those sugar leaves. But if you're trimming your plant really close, if you're still leaving a little bit of those sugar leaves on there, don't sweat it, man. They still smoke. And if you collect your sugar leaves, you can also make that into butter or into concentrate, or simply have some sugar leaf joints. They are fantastic. But those are some of my biggest harvesting tips. I hope these harvesting tips can help. If you have not seen this channel before, this is your very first video, I recommend you go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I would really appreciate it if you want to learn more about growing quality cannabis, you want to learn more about growing in general, or if you want to just subscribe to me to hit up my live streams to learn more about the space, definitely do that. If you at all like these harvesting tips, please leave a like. It would be greatly appreciated, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you very much. Also, don't forget about my Cash App down below if you want to donate and financially sustain this channel. It is greatly appreciated. I appreciate all that you guys give me. It really helps out a lot. So with all that being said, I will see you next time. Thank you very much.